What does your neighbor do that is creepy?
Story 1. So, I had a weird neighbor. We'll call him John. John was a maintenance man at our apartment complex for the first apartment my fiance and I had. He was there the first day we moved in and actually helped us move some stuff and fixed some stuff in the kitchen. John lived directly across the hall from us with his wife. Well, one day before our roommate moved in and my fiance was at work, John knocked on the door. He checked me out, not making eye contact, and then told me he had some furniture in his apartment that he and his wife wanted to give us because they were redecorating their apartment. He said I just had to come over and help him move it though, which made me a bit uncomfortable, but we had literally no furniture, so I said, sure. Went over there and pretty much moved their entire living room into ours. Now, that's not the weird part. He gave me the flat screen TV from their living room, the Google Chromecast for it, the TV stand, the couch, the heavy chairs from their deck, pretty much everything other than their pets in their bed. Then hit on me in my apartment too, which I just awkwardly said, thanks for the furniture, and tried to move on with my day. His wife came over and brought beer. I was 19, but said sure and invited her in. After a while, I realized she was also hitting on me. Then he came over and they were both just preying on me. I was saved by my fiance coming home in surprise at the new people and furniture in our previously empty apartment. They set up the Chromecast for us and left. Our roommate, my friend from high school, moved in. Now, she's an intimidating and independent, dominant woman. Her body type emphasizes her chest and luscious hips. Well, John never leaves open an opportunity to gawk at her and I when walking around the complex or just blatantly staring at our chests when we open the door. Constantly, for a year of living there, I was just creeped out and always heard them fighting loudly from across the hall. Honestly, you could hear it from the parking lot, and we were on the 3rd floor. They were always predatory. It started becoming clear when I couldn't walk out of my front door alone for a second without one of them coming out to say something creepy like, "Oh wow, that's a very sheer top. Don't wear that around here at night alone. We're in a good area, but not that great." Just effing creepy. My roommate was a year older than me and taller/bigger than me overall. She was a loud, hilarious Eastern European woman who honestly kicks butt and really wasn't scared of much. She scared the crap out of these people, and I relished it when we were out together. Once, she and all her no-craps-given glory opened the door one day to Creeper John. She was in a long sleep and just looked at him with this face, of which I can only describe as neutrally hateful, soul-crushing anger. Only he wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at each boob in shock and awe. Now, think of an extremely busty Svetlana from the show Shameless, looking like fresh morning hell and definitely not ready to deal with this creep's crap. That was pretty much my roommate. Let's call her N. Well, she said, either say what you came to say or quit looking at my boobs. I'll charge your wife for this peep show if you don't get the F out of here. He said, there's a free parking space available. She just looked back at me dumbfounded and said to him, you know neither she or I drive. Her fiancé's the only one who drives and he has a parking spot. Stop knocking on our door early in the morning so you can ogle 2 girls freshly out of high school. And proceeded to muster a big wad of spit and spit it over the railing of the stairs before closing the door. So yeah, John definitely sounds like a grade A creep that I'm sorry that you had to live by, but your friend sounds amazing. She sounds like someone that I would want to be best friends with and hang out with. I am not nearly this confrontational, but I am in awe of people who are, and yeah, good on her. I think a lot of people could learn from your friend and stop taking other people's crap.
Story 2. So this was a long time ago, and there are a lot of details I don't know. For context to the story, I'm currently 31 years old. When my mom, sister, and I would go to Poland to visit our family and basically live with our grandparents over the course of summer holidays and Christmas breaks, we had our apartment on the 4th floor. Grandparents have theirs on the 6th inside the same building. There was this old lady on the 3rd floor. Whenever the lights were turned on or there was a noise in the hallways of the building, she would rush to the door and swing it open and just glare at anyone she saw until she was sure there was nobody out in the hallways, at which point she would slowly close her partially open door. I'd never seen the door chain not be engaged in that door despite the amount of times I saw her door open with her glaring at young me. The woman died in her mid-90s when I was around 10. The neighbors realized that something was wrong with her very quickly because it had been an entire 16 hours of people going through the hallways of the building every now and again, and not a single time did anyone hear or see her in that time. Obviously, they called the authorities to break into the apartment, or the neighbors broke in themselves. Like I said, details were never made super clear to me, mostly because of my age at that time when this all happened. They got her body out before it got too messy, but the kicker is, I haven't even gotten to the really creepy part yet. Turns out that this woman had an entire bookcase of journals. A lot of them are still blank, but others all talked about us. She kept tabs of exactly who was walking past her apartment and when. She devised these expansive backstories about this shadow organization that everyone around her were members of, whose sole purpose was to monitor her and cause every little thing that went slightly wrong in her life. There was even writing on the wall specifically about myself and my family, about how we were the handlers for this branch of the organization, and we would go monitor our other assignments when we were gone for most of the year. In reality, we lived, went to school, and worked in England. This stuff went on, and it was honestly sad to see that this creepy behavior that most people just rolled their eyes at was the tip of the iceberg for someone so deep in the throes of mental illness, which was causing her isolation because she would never talk to anyone. Anyone who tried to talk to her would just be met with an unresponsive glare of anger and hatred.
I had my thoughts early on in this story that, this sounds like a lady who sadly has some mental health problems, but also, who knows how she got there? How long has she been dealing with this stuff alone in that house by herself? I mean, you said, 90 years old? You feel bad, but also, what can you do to help a person like that? She's on her own, independent, doing her thing. It's not like you can be like, hey, I think there's something wrong with you, and I'm going to help fix it. It's sad, but it sounds like she didn't have anyone really left in her life to help out, and, I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
Story 3. I used to live in a house I rented from my aunt. She also owned and rented out the next 2 houses to the right. The one at the extreme right had weird tenants. They seemed like a normal family, a father, mother, and their 2 16 to 18-year-old children, a son and a daughter, or so it seemed. They never said hi to anyone. All of my neighbors, including myself, talked to each other. Not them. Every time they came or left the house, they ran straight to the house, not even looking sideways when crossing the street. Straight to the house and locked the door as soon as they were inside. It stood out because the father had to park his old beater car across the street many times because of the 2 high-end vehicles in their driveway. I never saw the couple use any of those high-end cars. In fact, I never saw the mother driving, ever. The kids, which looked super spoiled, always drove those high-end vehicles, a brand new Volks diesel truck and a BMW SUV. The father seemed to follow a schedule the kids didn't, and were out late many times. The couple looked rather disheveled and dressed humbly. The kids were Gucci'd out. That always struck me as odd. Although they paid the rent on time, my aunt ended up kicking them out because she said they were very dirty, and whenever something broke down, they never called her to fix it. The last straw for her was when their boiler exploded for some reason and didn't tell her until the next door neighbor complained. They immediately took their stuff and moved out without any drama. I never saw a moving truck while they did. They just disappeared. I saw the inside of the house and it was a huge mess. The floor was cracked and scratched, the walls were peeling, and there were clumps of dust accumulated on the windows. Creepy. I wonder why there was so much secrecy. My theory is that the couple were not parents but guardians assigned to look after the kids so they wouldn't get too crazy. The couple looked like they didn't belong there. The kids looked nothing like them. That doesn't explain the condition of the house, though. It seemed like something was going on inside, though they were dead quiet all the time. Not a peep or anything going on inside. Weird and maybe creepy. Or maybe I was the creepy one for paying that much attention to them. Story 4. Had a neighbor once that pales in comparison to these stories. She moved into a neighborhood that had a ton of kids. She didn't have kids, not my business why. But she seemed to hate kids. Complaining about Halloween, complained about school buses, would hire people to dig up her yard, put in landscaping, then hire someone to change it back a month or two later. She got a rescue dog and let it out at 2 every morning to howl and bark for a few hours right under my baby daughter's bedroom. When I complained about it, she thanked me for letting her know, then just kept doing it. After that, my dog kept escaping my fenced yard. I made sure to seal up every possible home at the bottom so he couldn't escape. It was already pretty secure because I was trying to keep rabbits away from my garden. As it continued, the dog warden would show up within half an hour of my dog getting out every few weeks. I one day caught her opening my gate in the backyard. It became obvious to me that she was letting him out and then calling the warden. She also had a huge amount of lumber and drywall delivered to her home all summer once. I assumed she was finishing her basement. When she moved, I talked to the new neighbor, who is great, and they did not finish the basement and made no substantial improvements to the house. I have no idea what she did with all that wood and drywall. The improvements they did make define logic and basic craftsmanship.
First, I love dogs. I've had dogs a huge chunk of my life. And yeah, sometimes they bark or whatever, but it's the owner's responsibility. If you let your dogs out and they're just barking, especially at hours when you know people are going to be sleeping, it's your responsibility to not have that happen. You train them, you take them inside, whatever. Don't let them be a nuisance to other people. But the bigger thing is the fact that she was letting your dogs out of the yard and calling the warden on them. Like, if someone let my dogs out of the yard, like I live in Minneapolis, it can get the streets are busy. My dogs' lives would be at risk. And if I knew a person did that, I would not react kindly at all. The fact that you did not wield a baseball bat and tell this woman, if I ever see you near my fence, I'm going to paint it with you. That's way too violent. Don't be that violent. But I'm imagining someone doing this to my dogs and the possibility of them getting hurt, and it makes my blood boil.
Story 5. Happened last week, actually. There was one neighbor I'd casually met and had only seen around last week. Never got her name, but she would act really strangely around my dog. She'd get into her car or hide behind her front door to get away from my dog, who was always on leash and not aggressive at all. I can understand dog trauma, but this felt like a bit too much or exaggerated. And when I tried to talk to her or tell her that my dog wouldn't hurt her, she, mind you, a grown woman, would say in a childlike voice, "Dog name won't hurt?" I had a feeling something was off or that she wasn't all there, so I tried to avoid her or walk my dog further away from her to help her feel safe, and just showed kindness and concern toward her because I wanted to make sure she was okay. Come Friday, instead of leaving work around 1 p.m. like I was planning, I decided to stay late to see if a package was delivered to the office and let the office manager know I was there. So I left work around 2:30 p.m. and saw a message from the woman who lives across from me that cops and ambulances showed up to our complex, and noticed the times the messages were sent would have been about the time I would have gotten home had I left at 1 p.m. Come to find out from another neighbor, this same lady apparently drove her car into a ditch at the empty lot next to our apartments, was running up and down the street screaming, and was wielding a knife threatening to unalive herself or someone else, so cops and ambulances were called. It didn't hit me until later that had I gone home at 1 p.m. like I was originally planning, I would have run into this lady while taking my dog outside to go potty, and we could have gotten hurt. Kind of scary to think about after. I haven't seen her since Friday, but I really hope she's okay and gets some help. Poor woman was obviously going through something. Story 6. Maybe a decade ago, I had a neighbor that lived 2 houses down in a duplex. Man, that the whole family was bad. Can't complain the kids too much because of how crappy the parents were, but still had to deal with their mess. The kids were constantly cussing, even though the oldest was probably 5. They would also be running into the streets without looking. Luckily, they didn't get hit. The worst issue was the parents were fighting pretty much every other day. It wouldn't stay in the house either. They'd fight in the street now if it ever got violent, because I never saw number 1 get hit, but I did hear threats, and one time the wife was chasing the husband around with a chef's knife. It was 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're screaming at the top of their lungs. Even though in our neighborhood we don't call cops for noise complaints, there were a few times it got so bad, like the knife incident, that cops did come. No one ever got arrested though, because they'd be in the house by the time the cops came. Had to deal with it for 2 or 3 years till they moved out. Some people say they moved on their own, others say they were kicked out. Story 7. In my first apartment, I had an older neighbor named Olaf who would always crack his door open and look at us whenever we would come home/leave. We lived in a larger home that had been split into 6 apartments, 2 on each floor, 1 in the front and 1 in the back. And we had the basement front apartment and Olaf had the basement rear. And we shared a small landing that led to the stairs outside. Happened all the time and we would awkwardly greet him, but he would never say a word to us. Same apartment, the neighbors above us were at a minimum drunk and likely some drugs as well. Would have screaming matches, would lock themselves out and had broken a window to get in once, chiseled out their deadbolt with a screwdriver another. Passed out with their door wide open, the neighbor above them had a cat in heat and they shared a landing, and a feral tomcat sprayed all around their apartment. The guy used to park in the single parking spot alongside the house that was right outside our window and theirs, and let his big old truck idle noisily at 7 a.m. and make our whole apartment smell like exhaust. So glad when we moved away.
What is with the neighbors in apartments who are just like opening doors and staring at people without saying anything? I mean, I know that they've probably got some mental health issues and stuff, but it is just so uncomfortable for the other people living there. Because when you're in the whole apartment complex, it still kind of feels like your home, your private area. And yes, different people in different apartments, so it's not all yours, but still, there's a sense of comfort that comes from being in your apartment building. And when someone is just so blatantly antagonistic towards you in what is an extension of your home, that's just miserable. So I guess what I'm saying is people who do this, would you stop it?
Story 8. So this is a story from my old flat. Had a neighbor banging on my door one evening. When I opened the door, my neighbor waves a half-empty beer can in my face, stating that I'm the youngest tenant in the block. It had to be mine. Me being young and socially awkward just takes the can, empties the can down the sink, and throw it in the recycling. Moments later, there's a banging on the door that sounds like an elephant backing up, so I go to the door to investigate. Would you believe it's the same neighbor attempting to kick my door in? I see the lock start to give as the door frame splinters, so I open the door to tell him to F off, only to be met with a big old kitchen knife in my face. At this point, my then heavily pregnant girlfriend appears behind me asking what's happening. The next thing I remember, the door is shut and locked and I'm on the phone to the police. Apparently, I full-on pile-drived the guy away from the door and managed to get back in before he could get back up. Turns out he's known to the police for some rather nasty drug-related issues. Story 9. One of my neighbors at my apartment complex has a baby with another woman, they are not together, and has made it pretty clear that he's interested in me, with statements like, "Do you have a boyfriend?" And then gets really insistent that I should text him more often until I told him to back the F up because I'm introverted and have trauma of weird strangers coming on to me. The day after I told him about one instance of trauma, that is a whole different story for another day. Today let's talk about our childhoods, okay? I just keep contact with him limited, and the other day we happened to run into each other in the complex and chat, and he commented that I don't text him much, and then dropped, "Yeah, I just wasn't sure if you're into black guys," into the conversation. He is now a giant red flag and a creep in my book. Story 10. Building things and testing them even after dark, playing music from like 40 years ago. I could see her through my hedgerow walking around the same little spot at least a couple days a week. One week she brought an engine home from a car, took it apart, and put it back together. She must be really dedicated because the first day she worked on it, it was pouring down rain with 10-mile-per-hour winds at the end of November. Even weirder, she's only like 17 or 18, so she must have understood some cross-section books really well. Last I saw, she had an array of chemicals out where she worked. I thought, oh no, she's selling drugs. Then about 30 seconds later, I saw her take a blowtorch and light a tube full of it. There was a loud whoosh and a giant cloud of white smoke above her with bright reddish-pink flame. She wasn't making drugs, she was making rocket fuel. It's me. Did I become a weird neighbor by accident? A crazy hermit who spends all her time in the shed? Oh God, I might have some explaining to do with my neighbors.
So I'd say, if you are the weird neighbor in that instance, you're kind of you're an interesting weird neighbor. It's a good kind of weird that I appreciate, because I can also be that kind of weird neighbor. And my neighbor across the street definitely is that kind of weird neighbor, but in the most delightful way. I adore him. We don't talk that often, but he's great. Being quirky, interesting, weird neighbor is wonderful. That's just someone living their best life being themselves, you know? So, thumbs up there.
Story 11, my own weird neighbor story before I forget. There was a dude who stayed a floor up from me when I was living in an apartment in California that everyone in the building knew as Dale, but they only called him that because of his voice. He sounded like Dale from King of the Hill. Because if he was ever the one talking or introducing himself, he'd give a different name. Every single time. He smoked a good bit of weed, and sometimes you'd see him out drinking at the field or hopping pig. Funnily enough, according to Dale, I was the weird neighbor. To Dale, I was the bloodsucker with the kooky hats. According to him, being a witch was impossible. Therefore, I had to be a vampire. He would accept no other explanations. He referred to one of my sisters as the not bee witch bee who works at the good bar, and the other neighbors as coolios. I swear it wouldn't surprise me if someone told me Dale wore tinfoil hats and listened to Ancient Aliens or alien archaeology podcasts and the like. Story 12. I had a downstairs neighbor in my apartment building who had some mental health issues, but otherwise seemed harmless enough. Since the guy lived downstairs from me, I could occasionally hear him talk to himself about whatever. He normally wasn't loud enough to bug me, so I never bugged him outside of the occasional hi whenever we crossed paths outside. One day, I saw a van outside the building, and a younger man and woman were moving furniture out. The woman comes up and asks if I lived in my apartment. I say yes, and she gives me this plot twist. She was my neighbor's niece, and they were moving him into a home. Apparently, he was a previous victim of some pretty bad racism way back in the day. He was black and I'm white. And he had convinced himself I wanted to murder him. His place had been booby-trapped and somehow got his hands on a handgun. Hopefully he got the help he needs and is doing much better now. Story 13. This story is from my sister-in-law. Her family moved a few years ago to a new home in a very small community and didn't know anyone. They put up a pool in their backyard, and a man that lived across the street and one house down noticed my niece outside swimming. He proceeds to drop his shorts and have a wank on his front porch while watching her swim. My in-laws confronted him, but he just laughed in their face. He would come out and stand on his front porch and have a wank every time my niece went swimming. They called the police, but they wouldn't do anything about it. My in-laws eventually put up large pieces of fabric across the yard to block his view. He did this for a few years before he died. Story 14. Our neighbor was Karen, a total Karen. She used to get so jealous of us. One day we had gone away, she went into our backyard and stole a patch of stargazer lilies back there. I know she took them, as when we got back, they were not in our yard and there was a grove of stargazer lilies in her yard. Also, our other neighbors saw them. When we asked her about it, she said something like, "Can't I have my own garden? The flowers you had were freaking ugly." Trust me, you do not want to live in Massachusetts.
I just can't comprehend neighbors like this. Who has the gall to do this kind of stuff to their neighbors, like steal their flowers and stuff like that? Because it's not like, you know, you can almost kind of understand it when they do this crap in public, because they're like, you know what, I can throw a big fit and act like an absolute crap human being because I get to leave this place and go home and nobody can find me. It has an almost air of anonymity about it. But when you're doing it to your neighbors, that's That's your neighborhood. That's where you live. The people living next to you are people that you must interact with regularly. Does this not make something click in your brain like, maybe I should be nice to these people and my life will in turn be nicer? Like, and side note, also, you should just be nicer in public too, because it's great. Do you know how nice it is at so many like grocery stores and shops that I go to? I'm very nice. The people there have gotten to know me and they're like happy to see me. So when I'm doing a lot of my daily errands, I continue to see people who seem to like me. What a novel concept that is.
Story 15. Ever since my husband installed new cameras around the fences of our home, our neighbor next door keeps complaining about them being an invasion of privacy. Turns out he's been spying on his fence to see me in my own bedroom window doing what I do in my own home while taking pictures of me. I like to keep the blinds open sometimes for sunlight, and after that discovery, I shut them down completely. And my husband threatened to call the cops on him for taking my pictures without consent and stalking. That neighbor is married with 3 kids. Story 16. Back when I lived at my parents', we had a very kooky neighbor. We lived next to a dirt road, and whenever it rained hard enough for puddles to form, she'd come out of her house and start digging through the puddles. One day I was coming home when I saw her digging through the puddles in the pouring rain, so I finally asked why she kept doing that. Her answer was that she was saving the earthworms from drowning. I'm dead serious. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.